The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Sharon McDonald from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Thank you for joining us today for the last of a series on ramping up rapid rehousing. Today we're going to be learning from the Hamilton Family Center in San Francisco and from a multi-organizational effort in Houston and Harris County, Texas. So I'm delighted to get started here. And sorry, I have a little bit of a technical glitch every time I try and do the webinar where I can't figure out how to move slides. And luckily, I have colleagues that know how to help me. So today's speaker is Jeff from Hamilton Family Center in San Francisco, Eva from the Coalition for the Homeless of Houston and Harris County, and Jessica with the Houston Housing Authority. And just as a quick reminder, just because there's still a lot of ambiguity about what we mean when we say rapid rehousing, and sometimes people think rapid rehousing is just the financial assistance or just the housing identification, that it's each of these efforts. It's helping people locate housing, it's helping people with the financial end, and rapid rehousing in no definition is putting people in housing and walking away. There's a rapid rehousing case management and services strategy that's part of the approach. So we've been doing a webinar series on rapid rehousing, and I just want to let you know that there's a recording of all of them, and there'll be a recording of today's presentations, and the slides will also be available up on our website tomorrow. So these are the topics of the previous webinar series, so core components, ramping up rapid rehousing, looking at communities that have done so, and then we're going to move into some targeted populations and partnerships with a focus, hopefully next month, in programs that are providing rapid rehousing services to single adults. What are the strategies and the funding resources that they're using? So I am now going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff?
Thank you very much, and good morning or afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me and for being on this webinar. My name is Jeff Kositsky. I'm the Executive Director of Hamilton Family Center, and today I'm going to speak a bit on why it makes sense for communities to scale up rapid rehousing and how to go about making that decision, sort of how to raise the funding and the resources needed to scale up, and what actions and changes nonprofit organizations and or communities need to make in order to successfully scale up rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about Hamilton Family Center. We are a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco. Our mission is to end family homelessness in the San Francisco Bay Area. To that end, we provide temporary shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and eviction prevention for over 2,000 people each year. Next slide. So why would a community want to scale up rapid rehousing? Well, in San Francisco's case, as you will see by the two graphs up here, we've had really, I would say, an epidemic in family homelessness. In 2006, there were less than 1,000 students in the San Francisco Unified School District who were homeless, and today there are close to, or in 2014, there were over 2,300 homeless students in the San Francisco Unified School District. We saw a corresponding increase in the amount of number of families that were on the waiting list for family shelter. Back when I started doing this work in San Francisco in the late 90s, there was maybe at any given time 40 or 50 people families on the wait list for family shelter, and it took a week or so to get in. At the high water mark, we hit 287 families on the wait list with a 9-month wait to get into family shelter. We spent some time really analyzing our data, and as you'll see, there's a couple of times where the wait list dipped significantly and for a fairly prolonged period of time. And we decided to look into that and see why the waiting list went down and what we could do to make it go down again. Next slide, please. So Hamilton Family Center partnered with Morgan Stanley, the financial services company, who has this annual program called the Morgan Stanley Strategy Challenge. And they assigned 4 staff to work with us part-time for about 8 weeks. And some of them were there were data analysts, people from the real estate division, and financial services. And they really looked at our 7 or 8 years of data that we had collected in our Salesforce database. And really, we came up with a strategy that if we could scale up our rapid rehousing and eviction prevention work at a certain level, we would eventually be able to get the waiting list for family shelter down to 0. Now, there were a couple of other components to that, one of which I won't get into, and it's actually, I think it's great that Houston is on the line, because one of the things that San Francisco needs to do is to really do a better job at our coordinated entry if we're really going to get across the finish line and return our emergency system back to what it was meant to be, an emergency system rather than a place where you have to wait for 9 months to get into shelter. But rapid rehousing and eviction prevention were really core components of the strategy that we're working on to get our waiting list down to 0. Next slide, please. In order to scale up rapid rehousing, the first thing we needed to do, obviously, was to raise the money to do that. And we needed to raise about $3.5 million annually in funding in order to get to the scale that we need to be at. Sort of a triple threat that we unleashed upon the city. It was a combination of public relations. We got some amazingly, well reported on and very sympathetic stories, both on TV, the newspaper, and all different kinds of media. We spent a lot of time educating elected officials in San Francisco on the problem of family homelessness and the successes that rapid rehousing has shown, both in San Francisco and around the country, and then also put together a sort of a business plan that we presented to some of our larger donors to show them how scaling up would have a huge impact on family homelessness in San Francisco. Next slide, please. We were very successful in raising the money that we needed in a relatively short period of time. It took us about 6 months to do that. We had very large contributions from both Google and Salesforce. We also convinced the city and county of San Francisco to increase rapid rehousing funding. We got some funding through the Department of Veterans Affairs, through the SFEF program, as well as redeploying some of our McKinney money towards rapid rehousing. And then the state of California selected San Francisco to be part of a pilot program in order to is using TANF funding for rapid rehousing. So combined, we were able to triple the amount of resources that we had available for rapid rehousing. Next slide, please. However, just having more money wasn't enough, and one of the things that Morgan Stanley looked at was sort of our processes for how we operated our rapid rehousing program and what we were going to need to do to really triple our output. And one of the things that they found, which is what they call this their $1 million slide, is showing that we would get over 90% of our applicants were actually eligible for the program, but only about 60% who were eligible actually got approved, and then got through the process. Only 40% of them, actually enrolled in the program. So we were really losing large numbers of applicants because our process, it wasn't really rapid rehousing. It was slow version of rapid rehousing, and that we took a hard look at how we were operating and decided we needed to make some major changes to how Hamilton Family Center deploys its rapid rehousing resources. Next slide, please. And there were really 2 things that we needed to work on. One was our staffing pattern, and previously we had case managers pretty much doing soup to nuts. They would do intake, they would help do the housing search, they would work with landlords, and then they would provide case management both during the housing search process and as part of the after families got placed. and oftentimes the families were left to do a lot of the housing search work themselves. And we really decided that that needed to change. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the next slide. But the other thing that we realized we needed to do is to get to families more quickly. Families who were finding us and finding out about a rapid rehousing program, actually many of them had been homeless for months. And so one of the things that we did is entered into a partnership with the local TANF office, in California it's CalWorks, and with the school district in order to, and we created a hotline that eligibility workers or school employees can call in order to, when they have a family that's near homeless or is newly homeless, they can call us and we will go out to that family, to wherever they are. We have a rapid response team that we've put together. In this way, we're getting families much more quickly than we are. If we had a coordinated entry system, this step probably wouldn't be necessary, but we don't have a true coordinated entry system in San Francisco right now. But these partnerships have really helped speed up the process for the families that we serve. Next slide, please. I think the biggest innovation that we made as an organization was to break up the functions of work into intake, housing search, and case management. And what we did was hire a team of real estate professionals, and we set up basically an internal brokerage system. The real estate professionals on our staff, the realtor and the team that works with our realtor, develop relationships with landlords, and we use our CRM system, which is Salesforce. We put in all the information about available units that landlords have already agreed to accept the subsidies on, and our case managers access that information and then go and take the families out to the available housing units. They're able to search for available housing units based on the family's needs. It's really been a boon to our work. And we've also developed incentives for landlords in terms of extra security deposits, and there's other work that we've done in order to incentivize landlords to participate in the program. But what we have found as a result of just this initiative or this change to how we do our work is that going from a place where case managers were telling us there's no housing available, we actually are finding more housing than we are able to place our clients in, and we're now working with other nonprofits in San Francisco and are informally sort of serving as the clearinghouse and sort of the systems real estate broker, and then really having professionals that know how to talk to landlords and know how to work with them has really made all the difference in the world. And the final slide, please. The outcomes have already been really stunning. You'll see, so during the past year, we really started to ramp up our rapid rehousing program. And this slide's a little bit hard to see because 2015, this is only the first quarter in 2015, but what we saw is in the first quarter of 2015, we housed more people than we did in all of 2014 through our rapid rehousing program. So we actually are about 4 times the output that we were doing the year before. And as a result, the waiting list has gone down every single week since we started scaling up, which was really January 2015 was our kind of official relaunch of our new rapid rehousing program. And the waiting list has dropped from its high water mark of 287 families waiting for shelter. Now we're down below 150, and it's continuing to fall the more families that we house. It's a little bit early to assign causality to that, but we're very, very happy with the outcomes that we've seen so far. The mayor and other folks in the city are very behind continuing to scale up rapid rehousing, and we're hoping that by Christmas time, the waiting list will be below 100 is our goal, and then eventually, get back down to below 50 by 2017 at the latest. So that's sort of our story about scaling up rapid rehousing. The final slide has my contact information. You can visit our website where there's actually some training videos that we put together for primarily for San Francisco Unified School District staff about eviction prevention, homelessness, and rapid rehousing. You're welcome to use those if they're of any relevance or any help. And feel free to contact me at any time if I can answer any questions about the work we're doing.
Great.
And that's
Thank
all
you
I
so
got.
much, Jeff. And just as a reminder for folks in the audience, we will be posting the slides, including this one with Jeff's contact information. If you have questions, we're going to hold them for the end after we hear from Houston, but please post them in the questions box, and I'll get to them after the Houston presentation. And as I get them ready to line up, let me ask one question of Jeff, and it's just something I was curious about. When you talked, are you finding providing rapid rehousing to families earlier in their homeless experience makes it easier or harder or not any different in providing rapid rehousing? Does it matter for the families?
It's,
if you're housing
we only
them
have
in month 3 or, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we only have 3 months of data, but anecdotally, yes, it's absolutely easier to get a family that's newly homeless placed into housing. And the other thing that we have found is that there's no real indicators as to families that are going to be successful or not successful in rapid rehousing. One of the things Morgan Stanley did was a chi-squared analysis of, which on the demographics of the clients that we're serving, and there really is no indicator as to who's going to be successful and who's not. So we're really trying to keep it as sort of a zero threshold entry into the program. If there's any families who want to participate in rapid rehousing, we give them a shot at it, and that's also has proven to be, again, anecdotally pretty successful.
Great. So if I can turn it over to Eva and Jessica.
Yes, hi. Jeff, thank you so much. That was great to hear what San Francisco is doing. We're sitting here busily taking notes. Fantastic. So my name is Eva Thibodeau, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Coalition for the Homeless of Houston and Harris County. We act as the lead agency for our local continuum of care, and our local COC is Harris County and Fort Bend County and the more than 50 municipalities that fall within that geographic region. And I'll be one of the presenters.
And I'm Jessica Preheim. I am the Senior Program Manager with the Houston Housing Authority, and my job was created by our CEO to really try to further the Housing Authority's participation in the homeless service provider realm and to make sure that our resources are utilized in the most effective manner. Yeah.
All right, so we'll jump right in. The big question, why take rapid rehousing to scale? So we're a large geographic area. We are fortunate to have many resources in our community, but we realized that we had no coordination with how we were using those resources. Because of the HEARTH Act, our COC funding partners, our other local governmental ESG emergency shelter grant or emergency solutions grant partners began coming together on a regular basis to try to coordinate better, something that we had not successfully done pre-HEARTH. We realized that each of us had different kinds of requirements of the organizations that we funded. We were often funding the same provider from multiple sources and with different requirements, and that funding for rapid rehousing wasn't secure beyond kind of our minimum regulatory expectations. We saw a real opportunity to leverage these relationships and the existing work that we were doing in our COC around veterans to create a whole new response system for families. What this resulted in was moving away from individual agency rapid rehousing that tended to be more about agency priorities and specialties or that of a specific funder, and making a system decision to make our rapid rehousing be about clients first. So to back up and give you a little bit of insight into what was happening simultaneously in our system, we embarked on taking rapid rehousing to scale as part of this larger systems transformation. In 2011, our continuum of care, like many others, was struggling to meet the needs of homeless folks in our community. We were dedicating tens of millions of dollars a year to serving homeless households, and we have a pretty affordable housing market still, and we were not having any marked effect on decrease in our homeless population. In fact, our numbers were increasing. Houston was designated a HUD priority community in 2012, and it began a true transformation across our continuum from veteran households, chronically homeless individuals and families, to families and youth and young adults. As a community, we really began looking hard at our resources and adjusting them to meet the need to create a system targeted to permanent housing for everyone. We followed the directives of the HEARTH Act, and we adopted the federal Opening Doors plan to end homelessness. We implemented coordinated placement across our community and targeted resources based on need. We also built upon and improved available resources to get our entire system to scale. We knew as a strategy to end family homelessness, we would have to take rapid rehousing to scale and implement a system-based intervention strategy. So where do you begin? We began with the data, because that's what we do in Houston. We pulled data in 2012 and really began looking at it. We began this process of transforming our rapid rehousing response system in 2013. We knew that national estimates told us that 25 to 30% of homeless households will likely need rapid rehousing. In our system, we had 30,000 unduplicated enrollments, meaning about 900 would, and we had 900 folks actually enrolled in rapid rehousing. So we estimated the gap to be about just over 8,000 rapid rehousing slots that would be needed for singles and families in order to completely resolve. Based on our point in time and our HMIS data, we estimated that annually we had just over 1,500 families who would need some sort of intervention. Some would only need emergency shelter. About 240 would need permanent supportive housing services, and over 1,100 could likely benefit from rapid rehousing. What we have found is that rapid rehousing works, and according to our point in time, family homelessness has continued to decrease from 2012 through 2014. As part of our local action plan to end family homelessness by 2020, we knew that we were going to have to identify homeless families and rapidly return them to affordable housing. We had to drastically expand our rapid rehousing funding that we had available. We had to expand access to quality affordable housing and access to employment programs. When we looked at expanding funding for families, we had a twofold approach. Our funders created a single set of rules for community funding and agreed to adopt a single set of standardized documents that was developed by our SSVF, our Supportive Services for Veterans Family work group. Case managers came together, used their existing tools, adjusted them, looked at where there was duplication, where there was overlap, where there wasn't, and really got down to a standardized single set of documents for rapid rehousing that was as minimal as possible to get the job done. They then trained peers on how to use the tools and received feedback from them on how to improve them. And we have since built most of these documents into our HMIS system. It wasn't difficult to make the case for rapid rehousing when we looked at our system data. You'll see on this slide where we looked at emergency shelter and positive exits, meaning exits to permanent housing, and looked at the cost per person. We did the same with transitional housing and with rapid rehousing. So as you can see, we have found that rapid rehousing is easily the most cost-effective option for new homeless families. And we really used this argument to encourage investments into this new system. Now, we'll be honest, the way that we used to look was slightly inefficient and terribly, terribly confusing for homeless households. We had 5 different public funders. There were many private funders. There were 4 separate collaborations of providers made up of 2 to 5 agencies. The regulations placed on the different programs were different depending on where you went to, and there were very varied target populations, from DV only to young adults only to veterans only. There were 5 different program fiscal years, So you might find yourself with 3 different funders funding you for the month of June, 2 of them dropping off in July and 1 restarting in September, meaning it was very uneven ability to administer these funds, and the outcome measures were different. So what that translated to for a homeless household was, depending on what door you knocked on or what number you called and who answered, you could get a wildly different response to your housing need. Our solution was to move to a single system with no wrong door. We started with the client and the homeless household. We tie them into a coordinated access. We do a triage tool through our coordinated access to decide, is this a highly vulnerable family or individual? And our system solution in that case is permanent supportive housing. Or is it lower vulnerability? Is it a family? Is it someone, the bulk of people, who we know will benefit from rapid rehousing? We then refer people immediately from coordinated access to housing navigation. Our housing navigators work with people to help them get to and from properties, to fill out applications, to navigate whatever they need to actually get those keys in their hand and sign the lease. They also are assigned a rapid rehousing case manager, and it results in permanent housing. There we go, there's permanent housing. In doing this, we put our public funds into one aligned bucket of funding, and we employed a financial assistance intermediary to interface directly with permanent housing. And we used a combination of public and private funds to go into a case management intermediary. So we moved our system from being that of funding to individual agencies and organizations to using the 2 intermediaries that I just spoke about to manage our rapid rehousing system. So we brought together a collaborative of funders that were public funders and private funders. And we put out RFPs for a financial assistance intermediary and a case management intermediary. The case management intermediary had very clear guidelines that they are accountable to outcomes, to auditing and monitoring case management vendors, and to contracting those case managers. Case managers in this new system get to worry about clients.
Hi, this is Jessica from the Houston Housing Authority, and we serve as the financial assistance intermediary. And I just wanted to point out, that the switch to collaborative aligned funding model allows for just our main thing, a single financial intermediary. And what this means is that, like Eva had said prior, when there was multiple agencies funding, receiving funding from multiple funders, this often meant that there were various outcomes requirements, and also that on the client level, clients were really affected by what funding was available when they walked in that door at that time. So that affected the services, the duration, the type of services, and the quality that they sometimes received. So by the system transformation to a financial assistance intermediary, we now take on the responsibility of managing all of the different funding pots. And case managers in the system have been able to now know that when a case manager receives a referral from coordinated access system, that there is money to assist that family. They no longer have to take into consideration the budgets of their specific agency, and they're able to focus on the client. And again, we also take on the unit constraints. We do all inspections and rent reasonableness, which just allows case managers to focus on their clients. And so this means that instead of having to do all of the paperwork and get embedded in that, they can focus on the stability of the household. So this is a slide I like to use. It kind of illustrates, number one, that there's a lot of pots in the mix and a lot of funders that have really come together to align their funding in our system. But most importantly, this is no longer the individual agency's responsibility or the case manager's responsibility. This is now the financial assistance intermediary's responsibility to juggle what funding is available and when, and just make sure that that family is covered. And in more of a realistic scope, there are 7 different sources at the moment that are currently coming in to fund the financial intermediary, which looks about $4.5 million a year to serve about, we project around 1,000 families at $4,500 per household. So that's kind of what our pot of funding looks like to get things moving. So I also just wanted to touch on, again, we're the Houston Housing Authority, and people often ask us why we got involved as a financial intermediary, and I know some cities have struggled with trying to get their housing authority on board. I would say, number one, it was an easy sell to a housing authority because tenant-based rental assistance is what we do day in and day out, and we're pretty good at it. And number two, our community from the beginning of their system redesign has really tried to get our housing authority on board and be a vested partner, and we trust our continuum of care, and we trust the service providers in our community because of the attention that they have really provided to us. And we do have a president and CEO who likes to think big and really think about ways to maximize the impact that his vouchers and housing assistance can play in the community. So we do have that. And one easy sell for a housing authority is that no matter how much we would like to end poverty, a lot of times our rental assistance doesn't do that. But we can help the community end homelessness, and that is a really, really big sell. So kind of leading up to our commitment as a financial intermediary, we did create a homeless preference, and we have used that in various ways. And a lot of that has been facilitated by having a very forward-thinking continuum of care that not only looks at new ways that our vouchers can be used to stabilize, chronically homeless individuals in our community, but also ways where those individuals and families who have been stabilized using COC resources can then be transitioned onto a permanent subsidy, thus freeing up COC dollars for reallocation. So.
Great. So we know that it's not just about financial assistance and case management. So much like San Francisco, we recognized that we needed to really reach out to landlords, recruit landlords, market ourselves to landlords, and build those relationships so that when a family is in need of housing, that relationship is already there and has been built. So we have a landlord marketing team that does that work of maintaining and building relationships with landlords and explaining what rapid rehousing is. Then we have the navigation services, which I touched on briefly earlier. Houston is huge, and getting around can be very difficult. Also, when a family is in crisis and experiencing the crisis and the trauma of homelessness, oftentimes they're not at their best problem-solving capability, and so our navigators are with them to help them get through this difficult time and negotiate the move-in process. We know that there are often other fees and some financial barriers. People don't always have an application deposit or a deposit for utilities. They might have some arrears that they have to take care of. So we fundraise for barrier buster funds, various private monies, in order to help remove any barriers that may exist for a family who's trying to move into permanent housing. So if you would like to see more about what we're doing within our continuum of care, you can go to thewayhomehouston.org. That's our website. And if you would like to contact us, you can get more information, and the email will get to Jessica or myself through info@thewayhomehouston.org. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both. We have a ton of good questions, but I'm going to ask one of my own first and then open it up. Jessica, could you kind of walk us through that process of what using vouchers to free up resources for reallocation, what that looks like? How does that work? Give us an example of how you've done that.
Oh, I could definitely, I can touch on that, and Eva could probably touch on that as well. Our COC found that we did have a lot of shelter plus care vouchers on the table. In our particular community, some of those were being administered very well, and there was a lot of clients that had been stabilized using those resources. So they did come to the Housing Authority and ask if we could switch over the tenant-based rental assistance from COC dollars to a voucher program. Thus, in our particular system, freeing up for some reallocation to rapid rehousing dollars. I know that this looks different in different communities, and it doesn't always equate to a reallocation, but the use of our vouchers, we really feel like it's an easy sell to a housing authority because a lot of these clients have been served on this program for numerous years. And their case management services have done exactly what they should do and have stabilized these clients, but they are still clients who need the rental assistance due to their fixed income, and that has really been the main component that's been keeping them on the program. So we did do a mass conversion of shelter plus care over to Section 8 HCB vouchers.
Okay. So now I'm going to jump into all these questions, and for those who haven't had a chance yet, it's the questions box, and just type it in, and I'll do my best to get to you. So we actually have something kind of meaty, and I'm going to group several questions together and ask everyone to weigh in. So one question was around, what assessment tool processes are you using, and to figure out who should get rapid rehousing, to figure out perhaps how much resources people should get in their rapid rehousing intervention. But then actually another point that was raised is to Jeff's presentation, if it's hard to predict who's going to succeed with rapid rehousing, what is the value of assessment tools to figure out who's eligible for rapid rehousing? So who wants to start us off?
Well, this is Eva in Houston. We really, when we were working with our funder partners, the inclination was to try to build out a very structured system of how much assistance based on what your family looks like. And at the end of the day, we ended up not adopting that way of doing things. We adopted very aggressive outcomes. Because we recognize that if we want to truly have a client-centered system, then we need to train and support our case managers to be making the best decision for each family as far as how much assistance is needed. The other piece, through our coordinated access, when we're talking about common assessment tools and who gets put where, everybody tests positive, let's say, for the rapid rehousing intervention, and very, very, very few, those who are the most vulnerable and or chronically homeless, get routed and triaged over to permanent supportive housing. So this is our main system intervention for virtually everyone.
Okay, Jeff, do you want to jump in to the value, what assessment tools you're using and the value of assessment tools if it's hard to discern who's going to succeed or not?
We do. So San Francisco, again, doesn't have a strong coordinated entry system. Hamilton uses something that we created called the HAM tool. It's a housing assessment matrix that we use to kind of gauge where families are in terms of their housing needs. It's somewhat similar to the FSPDAT. I think we believe, and what we're advocating for, is that the city use the FSPDAT or something like it universally and drive people towards the intervention that's the most appropriate and least costly for them. So we do know that there is a percentage of families who we serve that really would be best served by permanent supportive housing, but we don't really have a system to triage folks the way Houston does. And I'm hoping I can convince our new friends at Houston to come visit us in San Francisco, because I think the model that they set up is very similar to the one that we're striving towards. But
Anytime, Jeff.
But I do think that there is some value to an assessment tool in terms of prioritizing folks for shelter and permanent supportive housing. But based on our research, there's if no reason to exclude people from at least trying to participate in rapid rehousing.
Okay. So, Jeff, this next question is for you. So, you mentioned a lot of different funding resources and some big commitments from the city and county. So the question is, how did you convince city and community leaders to invest in rapid rehousing in San Francisco? What kind of evidence did you bring to the table that helped convince them? And how did you get city leaders and county leaders, to the extent that you were able to do so, interested in solving and addressing family homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, like Houston, we started with the data. And thought through, took a look at, 8 or 9 years of data that we had in our own database, since we don't have all that information available to us in the city for all of the organizations. But we did, and as I showed in that slide there, we did see that when rapid rehousing was scaled up, that the waiting list for family shelter went down. And although the waiting list for family shelter isn't the best indicator or the only indicator as to how we're doing around family homelessness in San Francisco, it's sort of the canary in the coal mine for us. And pretty much presented that information in that slide that I presented to funders and showed them that when the city has been able to scale up this intervention, we have been able to make an impact. But when those resources are withdrawn, the waiting list will go back up again, and that we need to come up with a more sustainable long-term plan. So the data really just spoke for itself. It wasn't very complicated. We put together like a 3-page, business plan that I'd be happy to share, and that was sort of used that to kick it off. I think the other thing that we, everybody on the phone knows, but I think a lot of elected officials and others in the community don't know, is the impact that homelessness, especially long-term homelessness, has on children, and the fact that the problem is not often seen by folks. Like many of our elected officials didn't realize that family homelessness had effectively increased by over 100% in San Francisco since the start of the recession. It just wasn't it wasn't known. So a lot of it was just really education. Here's the problem, here's the impact of the problem, here's how we solve the problem. And folks were very excited and eager to support, and many were really generous.
Great, thank you. I have a question for folks at Houston, and it's something I don't think you touched on. The listener had heard some report that Houston is doing some of the paperwork for people who they're moving into housing at the back end after they've moved into housing, post-leasing up, as sort of as a way to kind of expedite moving people off the street. This might be one of the efforts you're doing with chronic homeless folks who are maybe moving into a permanent housing with a permanent supportive housing. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Hi. Well,
if that's inaccurate.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. We are not collecting a lot of documents on the back end, but we do recognize as a system that we are dealing with homeless families. And that being said, is that in order to be enrolled in the rapid rehousing program, you're in a shelter. We don't expect you to have all your Social Security cards and your IDs and your birth certificates for every child neatly laid out. And so we really do start the enrollment into the rapid rehousing program, and our case managers can enroll people before we have all the documents on the front end. And their job as case managers, and because they've been able to not worry about the inspections and the financial payments, they have more time to focus on gathering those documents and getting them to us. We just try to ask for the minimum. And we want to be able to get your stabilization plan in place and just focus on your housing. You're going to have to get an ID a lot of times to be able to talk to a landlord. It's approaching it more from a case management standpoint. But we do require the documents. We just approach getting them a little differently than some cities.
Okay. I have a question from someone who I hope is going to star in one of the next upcoming webinars, and she asked, you both talk at both Houston and San Francisco, talk about how you're working with domestic violence survivors and/or domestic violence providers, and how you might serve them a little bit differently than families that don't, or women that don't are not recently experiencing domestic violence.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that we do just by the nature of family homelessness in San Francisco. It's the #1 reason why families end up in our program end up homeless is due to domestic violence issues. So we have a strong relationship with many of the domestic violence organizations in the city. Frankly, San Francisco is a relatively small city. A lot of the relationships we have are informal. I do think that, again, we need to do a better job in building out a coordinated system that would include the domestic violence shelters and programs, since many of the clients that they serve are the same folks that we're serving. But we don't have any particular program or initiative around that I could speak to.
So in Houston right now, safety is so paramount when people are experiencing homelessness due to domestic violence. And in working with our colleagues at the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, we've recognized and acknowledged that our homeless service providers are really, really, really good at working at ending and resolving homelessness. They don't necessarily have all the tools to respond or to even ask the right questions when it comes to family violence. Conversely, we have an incredibly rich resource in our family violence part of our system that sometimes needs some more resources around housing and ending homelessness. So we've been very intentional about putting together a work group and trying to figure out the ways that we can bridge that gap. With rapid rehousing specifically, we have carved out domestic violence specific rapid rehousing that is controlled by domestic violence agencies specifically. We are starting a pilot this fall. We're in the planning phase for it right now. That will it will add to our coordinated access piece, but it will be a domestic violence specific coordinated access person who can act like a firewall and talk to and work with people who are experiencing domestic violence and who might need the immediate safety services of our emergency shelters on the DV side, but who also can help people who have moved beyond the immediacy of needing safety and now need permanent housing to be able to open up the access to our permanent housing resources on our non-domestic violence side.
Okay, great. So I have a couple more questions about assessments. So what criteria are you using to kind of really identify which families should be, or which single adults should be steered towards rapid rehousing, or or you really need to keep on the radar for permanent supportive housing? And when might a family just, what are too many barriers to do rapid rehousing with that you've discovered? What are, and for Houston, you've earmarked 25 to 30% for rapid rehousing. What are you looking for those families?
So I'll speak more from a system level, and then maybe Jeff can talk at an agency level what it looks like.
Okay.
So I think in Houston, we've been really trying to, we've done a great job of implementing our coordinated access system in stages and being able to get those stages operational, not all at the same time. So we started with PSH, and we were really able to triage our system to coordinate anyone who was vulnerable. We do focus on the federal initiatives and the priorities that were laid out. So we have been focusing on housing chronics and veterans, and that did give us a way to kind of establish a system for chronically homeless and really touch a lot of those individuals and assess them prior to even thinking about wrapping in rapid rehousing to the fold. We initiated the rapid rehousing triage system by working with our SSBF providers because that was the funding on the ground and really getting the tools coordinated. And I don't know if Eva, you want to?
Yeah, and so from the system level on the back end, when someone goes into rapid rehousing, if they weren't an obvious immediate fit for permanent supportive housing, maybe when they presented, the barriers didn't seem that extensive. We have a feedback loop built into all of our coordinated access systems. So the beauty is that when you use rapid rehousing funds, people don't lose their chronically homeless status or their eligibility for permanent supportive housing. So working with our housing authority with set-aside or preference vouchers there, and also with our permanent supportive housing provider community, when a case manager has been working with someone and the recognition is that we just cannot get past these barriers, there is that option to feed them back into the system and see, okay, what's the next best thing? The other place that we're looking at is we're embarking on working with our HUD-funded multifamily properties and doing some work around that. So if we have someone that just is likely to stabilize crisis-wise with some supportive services, but is not likely to be able to earn enough income to support their family in any foreseeable future, then we would look at doing a multifamily HUD-subsidized property.
Great.
And for,
so I have I'm sorry, Jeff?
Just in San Francisco, given the just incredible lack of affordable and any kind of housing in the city, it's our challenges are a little bit different. But I just want to go back to the sort of our take is that we couldn't find any predictors as to who was going to be successful or not successful in rapid rehousing, and do believe based on the analysis that we did that because it is really the least inexpensive intervention that we have in our toolkit other than helping families self-resolve, we try to get everybody, we try to screen people in and not screen anybody out of rapid rehousing, and again, so far the results have been positive.
So you don't have, Jeff, any income requirements, employment requirements, any other kinds of things that you're requiring before you move a family towards a rapid rehousing intervention?
Well, I think that what we do have is a system to make sure that a family, isn't being set up to fail in terms of the level of income. Also, I should say that the rapid rehousing programs in San Francisco allow families to be on the subsidy anywhere between 2 and 5 years. So that's probably different from other communities because the rents are so high here. Folks need a longer runway to increase their income. What we do is make sure that families are paying a rent that's realistic, and as a result, about 70% of the families who we're serving are moving outside of San Francisco County and into the outlying, the other 9 or 10, actually I think it's 13 counties around San Francisco where we've been placing families. So it's, to us, it's more of a factor of, how high is the subsidy going to be, and what's a realistic expectation for that family in order to increase their income over the amount of time that they have. And what really ends up being the driver is not whether or not they get into affordable housing, it's sort of how far outside of San Francisco they need to go.
Okay, and Jeff, actually, why don't I have you touch upon, if you don't mind, maybe the partnership with the TANF agency as far as helping families get employed. How is that moving along?
Yeah, so California has piloted in a number of counties a project where essentially they're providing rapid rehousing services to CalWORKs recipients. There's some variations to it that I won't get into, but the other component to that is San Francisco has a program called Jobs Now, which essentially provides employment more or less on demand to any CalWORKs recipients. So when we place families into housing, whether it's in county or out of county, actually, the CalWORKs or the TANF caseworker will work with that family to get them connected to the Jobs Now program and to get them employed. Or, if that's not a viable option, or if that the family's on a somebody in the family is on a educational career path, like they're in school or they're finishing up getting some type of vocational license, the TANF caseworker will make sure that they are enrolled in that and will monitor their progress.
I have a second question for you. Could you talk a little bit about what your internal brokerage of real estate professionals look like?
Yeah, so we have a director of housing resources, and she's a licensed realtor. And she has four actually staff people who work for her. We have a program assistant who's managing the database, both putting in prospects for the real estate team to look at. So if we see something available that looks good, we enter it into our database, and then we do a follow-up with the landlord. And then also putting in the available units that we know are going to be available to our case managers and the families that they serve. And then the other staff that we have do a couple of things. One is they work with our realtor and just following up leads, talking to landlords, convincing them to participate in the program. But they also will, if there's a problem with a tenant and a landlord is getting frustrated, they know that they can call the real estate team, and they serve as sort of a help desk almost for the landlords. They really manage the relationship with the landlord, and then will serve as a bridge between the case manager and the landlord. They're sort of involved in all landlord relations. We really hold those relationships wholly, if you will, and are very careful in how we manage it. In some ways, it's they operate in many ways just like our fundraising team does in terms of relationship management. And use the similar.
Just a couple follow-up questions, and then I have a couple questions for Houston. So two things. A, how do you get a commitment of a subsidy from the city of San Francisco, the county of San Francisco, for rapid rehousing if families are no longer living in the city or county? So how do you get them to still pay for it? How do they still pay for it? And then B, how do you convince families to move outside of San Francisco if they want to be in San Francisco, more in the immediate area? So those are two different areas to tackle.
Sure. Well, answer the second one first. We don't try to convince families to move outside of San Francisco. We present them with the facts, essentially. This is the real estate market. This is what you can afford. This is what we have available. We will also provide them information, to some fact sheets on the impact of homelessness on their children's brain development, and on the fact that we know that their kids will be better off inside housing than in bouncing between shelters, which may or may not be available, and let them make the decisions themselves. And most families will make the decision. We also will work with them, for families who want to make sure they can keep their kids in school in San Francisco. The other thing that we will do is help them get on waiting lists for affordable housing in San Francisco. And we have had quite a few families that will move to outlying counties, and then they, after 3 years of waiting, get on their number comes up for affordable housing, and they'll move back to the city. And then how do we convince the city?
Are they willing to pay the subsidy
yes.
when the families are no longer their residents?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the city understands that at the end of the day, this isn't about political boundaries and where people live. It's about children who were in San Francisco and became homeless and that it's in their best interest, in their family's best interest to resolve that problem. And you know, we can wring our hands and gnash our teeth over the fact that there's not enough affordable housing in San Francisco, or we can just address the problem and deal with it realistically, and we just present it to the city that this is, you know, this is what we need to do in order to get these children stably housed. You know, and by the way, you need to keep building more affordable housing, which, you know, our mayor and our board of supervisors is working on diligently. But in the meantime, we sort of have this backlog of families that are, you know, are languishing, and that this is the best result. The only place where we've had problem from a funding perspective has been HUD funding. The money that we get through the continuum of care doesn't allow us in most cases to place families out of county. So we have to kind of do the funding shuffle with families and with that funding, and that's been a bit of a challenge, but it's frankly not a huge piece of our pie, so we've managed to be able to work around it okay.
Okay, and I think I'll make the last questions. There's a couple embedded in here for Houston. First, have you used 211 in the past and moved away from it? If so, why? And then also, could you talk a little bit about the planning process? How long did this take, and how is this connected into your, I don't know, 10-year plan if you had it, but you know, if you were for another city or county that wanted to follow your path, how much time should they allocate? What does that work plan look like?
So we continue to be in talks with 211 locally to see when the intersection becomes right that we want to talk about moving forward, and you know, adding 211 or some function of it to our coordinated access. So that's an ongoing conversation, just deciding when it's right for them, when it's right for us. The planning process, we took about a year and really worked on standards and business rules and you know, aligning funding and deciding, you know, which funding cycle can we all put the money forth at, getting commitments. However, as we've been doing since, you know, all the hearth regs, the interim regs came out, it didn't stop us from implementing. We're huge proponents of building the plane while you fly it, figuring out as you go, taking off the pieces that don't work and slapping them on in a new place to make it better and more efficient. So even though we didn't have everything right out of the box, we started with what we had in front of us, and that was the, as we mentioned earlier, the SSVF, which is the Veterans Rapid Rehousing side. And we started working and trying our thoughts and ideas on them. And now, as of earlier this year, we've moved it to a system-wide level that's open to beyond just veterans.
Okay. So if that is it, any last thoughts, Jeff? Any words of advice for other communities who wants to follow your path?
I think the big thing is that, you know, we sort of as a movement need to be able to present to the community that there are finish lines we can get across. And I think that saying that, you know, having the data and information and then a plan and the resolve to say we're going to effectively end family homelessness, or at least make it so that families aren't waiting for 6 months to get in a shelter. You know, I think those are big and bold statements that we've made in San Francisco, but I think without sort of striving towards you know, getting across these finish lines for folks, we're always going to be kind of working at the margins. And I'm really excited that the city feels like there's a lot of people in the city that are lining up around scaling up rapid rehousing and other interventions to end family homelessness. And I think that's because we actually said that, hey, this is possible. Here's some data to show it, and we're resolved to make it happen. So I encourage folks to go along in their communities and really present you know, big, audacious plans to funders and to the folks that you work with, so that we can reduce just the incredibly large number of students that are homeless in our public schools.
Eva, Jessica, last words of wisdom?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think putting the vision out there is really important, and keeping the vision at the forefront as you're going through all the hiccups of trying something new. And for us, what we've really done is held up the client, the homeless household, as our litmus test. Whenever we've wanted to change something, to do something, our what if, our should we do it is always, will it benefit that homeless household? And if the answer is yes, then we continue to keep considering it.
And this is just Jessica. The only thing I would say that our community does is we've been very good at not being paralyzed by the problem, and not always assuming that when we go into it the first time that we had the right intervention. We always make sure we keep trying and we don't get rendered inefficient just by the scope of the issue.
Okay, and actually I'll see if anybody wants to answer one last question since I was in the process of signing off. So if anybody just wants to jump in, and how do you define high versus low vulnerability, and what resources are available to single adults with chronic homelessness that is identified with low vulnerability if permanent supportive housing is not warranted?
Sure. So our triage, we use the vulnerability index actually to generate a VI score, and that is how we prioritize our wait list for permanent supportive housing. We're pretty fortunate right now that we have had a large number, and a lot of it is because of our partnership with our housing authorities, both Harris County Housing Authority and the Houston Housing Authority, that we have had a lot of new permanent supportive housing options come online in the last few years. And so if someone is chronically homeless, our answer is permanent supportive housing.
Jeff, anything you want to add in there?
No, I would echo those comments and restate my invitation to my friends from Houston to come visit us at some point, because I think they're doing really what we want to be doing. One of the things that's in San Francisco that we're going to try to pilot next year, hopefully, is a rapid rehousing program for single adults. There have been some attempts in the past, but I understand they weren't particularly successful. But I do feel like there is going to be a need for us to find alternatives to permanent supportive housing, and I do think the idea of a coordinated entry and a way to triage folks into the right intervention is going to be critical to us being successful in having that at some point.
So actually, that's a fantastic plug. So the focus of our next webinar, which is scheduled, I believe, for June 16th, is going to be focusing on rapid rehousing for single adults. And so if they're not appropriate for permanent supportive housing, if they're not chronically homeless, but they still have a lot of needs and need a lot of help, what can we be doing? Who's doing things that are interesting? How might it be different from what we've learned about doing it with families? So I invite everybody to join us for that webinar. As a reminder, the Alliance will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website. It'll be posted tomorrow, and the slides will also be available for separate download. So I just want to really thank Eva, Jessica, and Jeff, and also working behind the scenes is Kelly and Gary in Houston. I think you guys have pulled off a phenomenal webinar, and I've learned a tremendous amount, and so I really appreciate it. And I just got an email message, so send me these too. If you're doing good rapid rehousing models with single adults or with other populations that we haven't been really attending to, please go ahead and let me know. And we look forward to more opportunities. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.